Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the minor gods in Age of Mythology Retold. Now that the meta has solidified somewhat and there's balance changes coming out, and I am certainly taking into account the preview patch that we have available at the moment for the purposes of this video. So this is a revision on the previous video that I've done. Let's talk about the Greeks first, and I will do the other ones later. So talking about the Greeks, let's talk about Athena. If we were to base it on multiplayer usage, Athena would probably be either an A or maybe even a B tier. But I personally do think she's an S tier minor god in Age of Mythology Retold. There are reasons, specific matchup reasons, why she's not necessarily as used as, say, Hermes, as an example, though you'd certainly want to use Athena in quite a few ways versus, say, Ares. But from my point of view with regards to Athena, the healing that she has is really significant. The benefits to infantry she has, also fairly significant. On top of that, Minotaurs are a really good unit for a couple of reasons. One of them is they're not consuming resources that you want to spend on other things. This may not necessarily be appropriate for, say, Hades, but it's certainly appropriate for Zeus. Because if you're playing Zeus, what are you going to want to get? You're going to want to get hoplites. You're going to want to get infantry. And other resources you can then spend on upgrading and getting Minotaurs. Keep in mind, this does have weaknesses, and if it was just a question of the upgrades and the units, I would certainly not put Athena in S tier. But, a very big but, her healing capability can, on its own, decide battles. And it's not just like early game battles. Don't just view minor gods from a perspective, oh, who's going to give me a power boost the moment I get them? Also consider potentially a longer game, or consider the matchups you're going to get where it goes to H3, even the rare cases where it goes to H4. Let alone, Wonder Age if you ever have a game like that. Athena is a fantastic god. She has scalability because of her god power, she has scalability because of her upgrades. And look, Minotaurs are just a really solid unit. They can handle bunches of infantry. I would not necessarily use them against the Norse. Like, there is that particular matchup where they aren't that useful because, yeah, Heresiers will win against them. But against pretty much anything else, or the vast majority of other things, Minotaurs are a really good unit. Against fellow Greeks, they're a good unit. If you're dealing with someone that's playing Greeks, like, unless you get outrated, unless you're playing against an opponent that just is running circles around you, then yeah, they might not be the best choice. But even then, having that healing capability is pretty damn useful, and having the benefits to hoplites that she provides also fairly useful. Like, it's really hard for me to argue otherwise than Athena being an S tier god. Then we have Ares. In terms of multiplayer usage, he could either be a B or even a C or even D tier, considering how many people are using him or not using him. But honestly, I think a lot of people are underestimating Ares to a very substantial degree. So, on one hand, Ares gives you long-term benefits for Toxicities, he gives you for Hoplites, he gives you for Hypaspis. That is not insubstantial. His god power may not necessarily be that great. Cyclops may not be the best myth units, but here's the thing, and this is what elevates Ares from my perspective, and I've experienced this myself, I figured this out, I've been using this myself, and it's actually quite good. Ares gives you Hypaspis in H2. I mean, that was very obvious, but until you play multiplayer to a decent degree, you don't really realize how insanely powerful that is. The current meta of Age of Mythology Retold is really focused on the early game. So Classical Age, maybe Heroic Age, though a lot of games do get decided in the Classical Age to the Heroic Age period. Well, here's the enormous benefit that Ares gives you. Cyclops are siege units. They're actually better to get than Petroboli in a lot of cases. Like, seriously, if I were to pick between Petroboli and Cyclops, I would pick Cyclops in a lot of situations, let alone the fact that you need a fortress for Petroboli in Heroic Age, whereas Cyclops are tier 2 units. Sure, you can talk about Hydras in tier 3, don't get me wrong on that, they have benefit, but as a tier 2 unit, and always remember that, as a tier 2 unit, to deal with enemy bases, they're fantastic. Furthermore, getting Hypaspis in H2 is gigantic. Get a better Hypaspis, because remember, that upgrade that unlocks them doesn't just unlock them, it makes them stronger. Well, that means you have the single best human unit that anyone can get in the game in H2. Because like Hypaspis with Ares upgrades will defeat any other human soldier in H2. Doesn't matter if it's cavalry, doesn't matter if it's archers, doesn't matter if it's infantry. There are a few things that you can do against that. Like, what are you going to do against Ares with Hypaspis? Maybe Atlanteans with Chirobalistas, let alone the cost of that particular situation and their speed. And, you know, you have alternatives to dealing with those. But what are you going to do against Hypaspis? Marmillo for Atlanteans are not going to win that matchup. Even if they have Oceanus' upgrade, even if they're heroes, they're not going to win that particular matchup against Hypaspis. Because Hypaspis are stronger against infantry. Other human soldiers, Hersirs will lose, Throwing Axemen will lose, Berserkers will lose for the Norse. Other Greek units, yeah, hoplites aren't going to win that. And the thing is, you can talk about like range units, but get a blacksmith, get the range upgrade. And if you're dealing with myth units, well, this is where Greeks shine in the early game because their specific heroes are very strong against early game myth units. Like anything. Like, especially if you're playing Poseidon, you might not think about it, because I know a lot of people that are playing Poseidon think, like, there's only one choice for H2, but it's not true. I have found that Poseidon with Ares is an incredible matchup, because consider it. You get better infantry, you get better archers on top of that. While it's not natural in some ways to go with cavalry, you will also surprise your opponent, because a lot of people that go against Poseidon expect cavalry. Well, what if you're going infantry rushing with Cyclops? Well, there's very little that your opponent can do against that. Like, in terms of the toolbox that they have available. Any myth unit you can counter with your heroes. Any human soldier you can counter with your Hypaspis. Sure, he might be outrated by your opponent, but this is where Poseidon really shines with this, because Poseidon has Atalanta, which is a really fast freaking hero, to the point that they're even nerfing her in the most recent version. But even then, doesn't matter. Also, Hades can work very well, because remember, you have Hades and Poseidon. Both of them can shine very well with Ares. I don't think he's quite S tier because of the god power. Like, I think god powers can be significant. Like, Pestilence, pretty useful if you're going on the offensive, not so useful in other situations, whereas Healing from Athena is useful on both defense and offense, but undeniably, the early game aggression is significant. But not just the early game aggression, because you consider this. Let's say you don't have the capability of raiding an opponent. Maybe they have too strong defenses, whatever, right? Well, the fact that you're starting to build a tier 3 unit in H2 means that when you get to H3, with all the significant benefits that come from that, it means you already have an army of those units that you can easily use there. Sure, your vulnerability is to raiding cavalry, all that kind of stuff. But still, there is a substantial level of power that comes from Ares. Honestly, I'm tempted to some degree to put them in S tier, but I just don't think, the god power is necessarily there. Also, Cyclops can be a bit expensive and can be easily taken down by, a hero squad, though. That's what the Hypaspis are for. Because anything that can counter the Cyclops, you deal with the Hypaspis. Anything that counters the Hypaspis, you can deal with your heroes or your Cyclops. Then we have Hermes. If we were basing this on the multiplayer meta, Hermes would be S tier. I don't really think he's as much of an S tier as some people think he is. Now, to be sure, Hermes does give you a free scouting capability. He does give you a cavalry benefit. Those are not insubstantial benefits. Ceasefire can be useful sometimes, especially if you're trying to be, aggressive with hunts, if you're trying to go out there and getting food or resources, and you just want to reduce the risk of your entire village or line in that particular area being killed, or you're trying to build a forward base and, you just want to screw your opponent. That is powerful. I don't quite think he's as much of an S tier. I understand why he's dominating in multiplayer right now. I understand that, but I think, he's A tier. Especially since Centaurs are getting nerfed soon enough. And I suspect that Hermes is going to suffer a bunch of nerfs. To be clear, he's dominating right now in the multiplayer meta. I don't necessarily think he's as superb as the meta has made him out to be. I think what's really happening with him, feel free to disagree with that, people right now are still learning the ropes. learning how to deal with raiding, learning how to deal with early game aggression. I can't tell you the number of matches I've been online myself where it's like you just put a bit of pressure on your opponent and it just completely fold. I'm not joking on that. That is happening, and it's not just happening on a low level. It's happening on a higher level. Like one of the highest ranked players in the world got to a very high level by playing extremely aggressively. I think that is going to change as people get more used to build orders, as people get more used to the game. And Hermes' cavalry raiding capability, his centaurs, people are going to figure out that maybe they're not quite as great as they might be. Besides, they're also getting nerfed. Like, their speed is being reduced, their attack is being reduced on their special attack. So, you know, giving him an S tier when he's just getting a pretty substantial nerf is not warranted. Then we have Aphrodite. Aphrodite, I think, is easily an S tier god. Like, the Nemean Lion is ridiculous. Like, as a unit, as a myth unit, that thing is scary as hell. You know, you can talk about the Hydras. You can talk about many other myth units in the game. But one that disables your entire freaking army for a period of time is scary as hell. And does damage at the same time. The reason it's so scary to deal with, beyond the fact, like, Aphrodite has disables portions of your army, beyond the fact that she gets major economic upgrades, the Nemean Lion is really scary because a lot of matchups, if you look at a lot of matchups, it's like going in, trying to do some damage. If you're losing, pulling back, well, you're not going to pull back with Aphrodite if you get an unfavorable matchup. So that is one of the reasons I think she's an S tier, because that kind of capability is not something to be underestimated. Like, that alone can win you the game if it's handled correctly. And beyond that, like, just the economic benefits that are significant. Then we have Dionysus. You know, I'm going to say it, I think Dionysus is certainly an A tier. Bronze is a really powerful ability. His vampiric aura ability for cavalry, you know, if you're doing raiding, you know, if you have a combination of Hermes with Dionysus, those could be considered S tier, right? Poseidon, Dionysus, Hermes. That is something a lot of people use. I don't think on his own he's necessarily that strong. I mean, don't get me wrong, Hydras are strong units, but they're also slow. And that is something to take into consideration. The speed of an army is actually important. Just because you have a slow-moving brick does not mean that you will win in every situation. There are ways around that state of affairs. But certainly a good amount of power. I'd say the god power is the most useful aspect of him, because, like, yeah, bronze is just, like, ridiculously strong. Then we get into Apollo. Yeah, I think Apollo is easily a C tier. I think if games lasted longer and defenses were more important, then he could be higher. But right now, compared to alternatives, compared to the Nemean Lion, compared to the Hydra, compared to the bronze ability, like, Underworld Passage is not doing enough right now. There are so many things you can... Like, if people were constantly building walls, and if we had, like, the Age of Empires 2 meta, where people would build fortresses, and you wanted to get a way of getting past their walls, their defenses, sure, he would be much more useful. But the current situation, not so much. From my perspective. One of the things, by the way, I forgot to mention is, like, Hermes, like, I would personally rank Hermes lower, but the one benefit he does have, and one of the ones I forgot to mention, he gets a free scout. That is not insubstantial, because that kind of line of sight is important. Like, yeah, you can say Pegasus are free and all that, but he gets better Pegasus, and he gets one for free, constantly. That is pretty important, because it means just like, oh, you get Pegasus, just putting on auto scouting or putting on a couple of waypoints, and if you lose it, whatever, you haven't lost anything. That is a substantial benefit. Like, that's one of the reasons I think, like, I would rate Hermes a bit higher. Like, that kind of scouting capability is not something to be ignored. But yeah, Apollo, you get some healing, I guess. That is not useless, but if I'm picking between Aphrodite, Dionysus, and Apollo, I'm picking Aphrodite and Dionysus any day. Then we have Artemis, S tier. Like, Earthquake is something that absolutely needs to be nerfed, I think. Like, it's kind of hilarious. They nerfed Meteor, but they didn't nerf Earthquake. You know what's more scary? The freaking Earthquake. Chimeras are also really strong myth units. They're strong on their own. They're strong in bunches. They're strong in smaller fights. They're strong in big fights. Like, the amount of AoE damage they can do, pretty damn substantial. And then you have her range benefit as well, so yeah, really good goddess. Hephaestus for 1v1, given the current state of the meta, I think I'm going to put him B tier. The reason I'm going to do so is very, very few games are lasting long enough to really take advantage of Hephaestus's benefits. Don't get me wrong, in a longer game, he would be S tier, right? He would be the choice, the choice in every single game, but currently, as it stands with the meta, I don't think Hephaestus makes it higher. The reason is, games are just not lasting long enough, so the benefits that you're getting with Hephaestus, the resource cache, the extra upgrade for your elite units, which are really damn strong, like especially as Poseidon, but not just that. For any single Greek god, those would be substantial if current games lasted longer. But they do not. They're shorter games. Very, very few games even get to age 4, and if they get to age 4, the way they're decided is by whichever god has a knockout blow in age 4. Then we get into Hera. I know a lot of people like Lightning Storm, but I don't think it's Earthquake. Simple as that. And Medusa are not chimeras. They're better than Colossi. They are good. Like, Medusa are a specialist unit. They're really good against, like, if you're dealing with big single entities, right? That can do a lot of damage. So if you're dealing with someone, let's say you're dealing with Odin or Loki that, you know, is getting mountain giants, that can be useful. Sure enough, absolutely. In that specific situation, extremely useful game winner. But it's not Earthquake. It's not the same level of power. So I don't think she gets an S tier. And that would be my ranking of the Greek gods. Say what you will about the Greek gods, the minor gods, they are extremely powerful. Like, I think like the Greeks overall have the best lineup of minor gods in the game. Because you look at other civilizations, there's some useless gods, you know, for the Norse, for the Atlanteans, for the Egyptians. There are some useless gods that you never pick. With the exception of Apollo, and even then he has his own benefits, don't ignore that. With the exception of maybe Apollo to some degree, and certainly nowhere near the level of Fa, you would want, there's a place to use every single minor god that the Greeks do have. Even, you know, Hephaestus might be B tier, but that's just because of the current meta. If games start lasting longer, he'll bump up to S tier where I placed him last time. But we'll see about that. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more. And next up, I'll do the Egyptians. Ooh, that is going to be rough because the Egyptians, you go from this situation to the Egyptians, that is a pretty damn rough state of affairs.